Hi, my name is Madeline Hagan. I am a historian with the firm Historical Research Associates in Portland, Oregon. Today I am interviewing Mike Greenslade on behalf of the Historic Trust for their Officers Row Memories Oral History Project. We are recording in the Marshall House on Officers Row in Vancouver, Washington. Today is November 4th, 2024. Mike, would you please introduce yourself?
My name is Mike Greenslade. I'm from Troutdale, Oregon. I had the opportunity back in the late 80s to renovate the Officers Row homes.
Mike, you were a contractor for Officers Row, is that correct?
Yeah, I worked for a different general contractor back then. Currently, I'm a founder of Bremik Construction. We actually still do a lot of historic renovations. We just clearly recently got selected to do a historic renovation down at the University of Oregon. We're really excited about it.
Amazing. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
it's a great
Can you
opportunity.
give details? Or is it under wraps?
It's there's not a lot of details now. It's a major renovation and adding a new basement below a historic building. It's going to be a great job.
Yeah. Who were you working for?
PNC Construction.
PNC Construction.
Yes,
And what was your role,
I was the Field Superintendent.
and what did that mean for the project?
I managed the subcontractors. We did a lot of self-perform work, all the carpentry work, and we renovated every one of the homes on the row.
Prior to your work at Officers Row, had you worked on historic structures in the same way?
I had, yes. I
What
kind
was
of
your
cut my
experience?
teeth on a lot of them. We did a lot of work for Bill Nato back in the day.
Wow.
Albert's Mill, several of the historic buildings downtown Portland. And
Tell me about that. What was it like to work with Bill?
Bill was actually great. I really got to know him well, and hated to see him leave us at a pretty early stage of his life. But he was an inspiration. He was a great visionary, and saved a lot of really neat buildings in the city of Portland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and tell me specifics on buildings. Do you remember which buildings downtown you worked on and what that was
Yeah, the
like?
Galleria, I had mentioned it earlier, Albert's Mill, which was a major renovation built on piling in the river, and we had to repair rotted pile, pour new pile caps within the Willamette River. It was interesting because back in the day, the ships would come in for ballast. A lot of times it was cobblestone and or china plates, and when we were excavating below the building, we ended up running into all kinds of old bottles and plates that they would, when they pumped the river, dredged the river, ended up,
Yeah.
it was fill underneath the building, and it was a gold mine of old treasures.
Oh my gosh. What
Yeah.
happened to those treasures?
The Historical Society in Portland took some of them, and some of the guys took some of them, and I mean, it was backfill back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah,
So cool.
yeah.
What was downtown Portland like at that time?
It was a building city. It was beautiful. There was a lot of buildings getting renovated, and there was new construction going on. And Portland it was a fantastic downtown. And then we had the unrest here a couple of years ago. That was sad to see the despair that took place during that, and it's going to take a while to turn around and work our way out of that. But hopefully we're on the right path to get back on track. It's a beautiful city.
Yeah. And kind of comparing that to Vancouver, what was Vancouver or Officers Row more specifically like during the time that you were working here?
Well, when we started Officers Row, they were pretty much abandoned homes. There was all the roofs got replaced. A lot of the buildings had major leaks. I know the building just to the east of the Marshall House, there was quite a fire in there. There was a couple of buildings that had fires, and there was a lot of rebuilding of trusses and structure, and it was pretty dilapidated when we started. It was great to see a group of people that cared about this treasure and spent the money. The city of Vancouver raised the money and did it at the right time, because I was looking at what this cost back in those days and what it would cost today. It would be hard to do today.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yes.
And what are your memories of how work began here? Was there a effort from the city to rehabilitate? Was it more of a grassroots?
I don't know the specific funding package for it, but I know the city was very involved, the City Historical Society. There were a lot of different agencies involved. I know that when we came in, we did an assessment, worked with a fabulous couple of architects that were passionate, Bill Hawkins and George McMath. They were fantastic. I mean, it was the team that ended up being assembled from the carpenters and laborers on the ground to the all the way to the top in the investment group. They were a real pleasure to work for. Everybody was passionate about it. Really cared about saving the Jewel Officers Row, and we came in early on and did an assessment of every building and worked through budgets and got to the point where we actually started the work, and the result to this day is they still look fantastic.
Yeah. And you described some of the conditions, leaky roof, a fire in the neighboring house. Can you give some more details of condition specifics? There
was an array of structural issues that we had to upgrade, where walls and foundations were failing. The foundations here, most of them, they were brick. We had to rebuild a lot of those. We did a lot of temporary shoring. The Grant House was unique. A couple of its footing piers were stumps. And we ended up finding some real structural issues with the Grant House. On the northeast side, we ended up having to excavate down to rebuild some structure. And right away, we didn't get very deep into the ground. We uncovered like a small dump area. It was full of dishes and china, and obviously we got shut down right away, and the archaeologists and historical folks spent a few weeks in there sifting through it and collecting a lot of what was down there.
Wow.
The other unique thing about Officers Row that I found, and I've never seen prior to or since, all the wood trim is cedar, which is really unique. And I guess there was a cedar mill either on site or just off site that they milled all the wood, and there were a lot of unique features of molding, and we rebuilt all the decks. The decks were rotten, did new structure, reinforced all the foundations, spun all the new balusters. We had a lot of custom-made knives to do this project, from the moldings to the balusters to the handrails in the Marshall House, etc.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Did you use cedar? Did you replace in kind?
No, we didn't use cedar. It was a clear vertical grain fir.
Cool. Yeah. And was that?
I mean, on the decks and things like that, yes, that was cedar, but not on the interior.
Yeah.
And we renovated and restored as much of the existing material as we could.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And was that the case for? Were there plaster moldings still intact?
There was a lot of effort that went into restoring them from water damage and just age. And I mean, this house, for example, we did a lot of work restoring some of the plaster that was damaged. And all the walls are lath and plaster, and everything was balloon framed, which you really don't see in this day and age. They had the length and the lumber locally.
And what were some challenges associated with working with balloon frame buildings that you don't typically work with?
Well, when it's balloon frame, from the foundation all the way to the roof structure is the same wall, and so it requires a lot more temporary shoring. Like if you have a second floor where you've got to do structural work, you've got to shore from the first floor, and sometimes we'd have to shore all the way to the ground. You couldn't put that load on the lower level, and so it required a lot more shoring and methodical practice to figure it out, and bring the structural engineers in when you had to, and take a look at the best means and methods to do it.
Have you worked on balloon frame since?
Yeah, some of the older buildings for sure, more on the residential side, but yeah.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about some of the details that were present. You talked about custom knives.
Yeah.
Tell me more about the actual process day-to-day of what you were working on?
Well, you'd really get in an inventory and see what needed to be replaced, or what kind of knife you had to build. We had to get ahead of all of it, and a lot of it was the same type of molding within the homes, but some of them certainly weren't, and you had to make a knife. And it's pre-planning, it's figuring out the mousetrap and then getting things ordered, so when the guys and gals were here to install it, the materials were available.
And were most of the people who were working on the physical, the work,
Mm-hmm.
Trained in historic structures, in preservation, conservation?
No, not really. I mean, they're good craftspeople, and some of the, for example, me, I've just got a lot of experience in it, and you understood what it took. And I mean, renovations, you're building a new mousetrap, you kind of got to think outside the box, and you really get to use your craftsmanship when you're doing these historic renovations.
Yeah. And in terms of, I'm trying to think of how to ask this question. In terms of the kind of top-down relationships on the work site, were there people who were trained in preservation, in conservation, or historic architects that had a vision of how they wanted the restoration to go?
I mean, that really, I mentioned their name earlier, Bill.
Yeah.
Those guys the architects were passionate, and they had a ton of experience, and they were historic preservationists, and Bill and George were just fantastic to work with, and they were reasonable. We'd put our heads together, we'd come up with a good solution, and we'd move forward. But we all wanted to do it right. We wanted to, try to replicate what was here that was built in the mid-1800s, and that was the attitude, and everybody had good ideas and reasonable, and it was a good team effort, thought process for a successful project.
What did you like to work on most?
I liked it all. I mean, it was unique. I came back later after the main phase was done and it was actually opened up, and rebuilt the front porch and the railing on the second level of the canopy here at the Marshall House, and then the Widow's Walk and the big tower. Rebuild all that on a different phase.
Amazing.
Which was really cool to get to come back and finish what we couldn't afford in phase one.
Yeah. And were you involved with the Howard House at all?
Yes.
And why was the Howard House left out of the original?
I think it was budgetary. It was interesting because General Howard, I'm a big Nez Perce, Chief Joseph advocate, believer, and to work on Howard's house here, who was the general that ended up getting assigned to the war, it was. I always rooted for Chief Joseph. We all knew the history, and so that didn't happen, but it was really unique to kind of have that relationship and know what happened here and the house he lived in, and they got dispatched out of these homes in Fort Vancouver, and it's an amazing story.
It's complicated.
Very complicated.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
And what do you think, speaking of the history, what do you think Fort Vancouver and Officers Row kind of symbolizes, either for Vancouver or national history, or what's its importance?
I think it's fantastic, and it's amazing how many people still don't know what exists here and the history that exists here locally. But it played a big role in opening the West and on a national level. I mean, we had a president that stayed here, Grant, and that's pretty cool. And I think the neatest thing I discovered when I was working here, one of the houses I had a lot of work and I was very involved in, was the Grant house. And up in the attic, when I first went in there and started assessing things, I found a map. The guys were out here surveying the Oregon Territory. And it was a hand map of the Oregon Territory that was priceless. I gave it to the city. I think it's in the historical museum in town. But just to see that, and then some carvings on the walls up there about the guys that were out here surveying the Oregon Territory and missing, they were lonely but excited. It was really interesting.
My goodness.
Yeah.
What else? Give me more of the stuff that you guys.
One of the things we did find too on the grant house, again, everything was budget driven, but they ended up coming up with the money, but there were several layers of wallpaper on that building. And it was put on with, if I remember right, by these little staples and nails. And we ended up spending probably 2 or 3 weeks with a group of folks in there pulling all those nails to get it down to the original boards. Never seen that in my life. Usually wallpaper's glued on, and this, the deeper you got into the layers, it was mechanically fastened back in the day. Yeah.
And so you mentioned earlier the digging the footings of the grant house, right?
Yeah.
And finding a treasure trove of archaeology.
Yeah.
Were there any, and then finding a map in the attic, were there any other kind of instances where there were discoveries made?
There were a few. I mean, for example, if you look at the sidewalks out here, we were not allowed to dig down into the ground because of the historical treasures that exist here. And so the sidewalks were actually, we'd skin the grass off, it would be about it, and they actually sat above the grass, and then they brought some extra fill in to blend it. But we did that, and we were running, the gas company was running a gas line down the back alleyway road, and in that process, actually found a pine box, which stopped things right away, of course, and we ended up going around it. But yeah, who knows exactly what's under the grounds of this place?
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And did they do some investigating on that pine box specifically?
No, they didn't. No.
Yeah.
No, it was not opened, or I think it was recorded, and that was that.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Is that standard working with historic buildings, that you make discoveries like that?
Well, that one's unique, to say the least. Yeah, I mean, everything seems to have a little treasure or two, and even the Marshall House had some pretty cool stuff that we ended up giving the Historical Society. I think there were some old maps, some stained glass, and some different things we found in here.
Yeah, the stained glass in particular is the stained glass in any of the houses original?
I think it was in here, in the Marshall House.
Yeah. Did you have stained glass people, or was that?
I think we did have some. We had to repair.
Yeah.
Had stained glass people, match it, and it's all leaded glass, and it's the original way they made stained glass.
Yeah. And how did that work with certain things that were more specialized? I know most of the stuff you guys as contractors were able to do, but with stained glass, were there other?
Yeah, I mean, the door hardware, the porcelain knobs and the mortise sets, and we were kind of trading back and forth with like a Hippo hardware, to make everything work, and we ended up, giving them in return some of the door hardware that we didn't need. But it was just, you're always turning over the rocks and seeking out the people that can fill the need on these older buildings.
And tell me about Hippo hardware.
They've got a lot of old door hardware and different relics from old buildings, and been around a long time in Portland. And for a project like this, I mean, it's the pocket doors. We had to rebuild and get the pocket doors operating right, and they don't make those mortise sets like they did back then, so you'd have to source them, or find parts and rebuild them and put them back in.
Did you work on every house on the road?
I think I touched every one.
And you worked the most on the Grant House?
No, I did several of the houses.
Yeah. What was your favorite house to work on?
It was the Grant house.
The Grant house.
Yeah.
Why?
Just the history, and yeah, it was the first house, and I mean, if the walls could talk, I can imagine that would be an amazing story.
Mm-hmm.
And it required a lot of work. The Marshall house, I did a lot of work, and this was one of my projects too. And I mean, it was unique kind of compared to the rest of them, but it's a beautiful place.
And the conditions were different for each house.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
And how did that affect did you guys do stages? Did you start on one house and then move to the next, or were there concurrent projects in all the houses?
It phased a little bit just in the beginning to kind of get the design, finished, and our hands wrapped around the needs of each place. But for the most part, it was concurrent.
Wow.
We had a lot going on.
And how many people were working at one time?
Oh shoot, I don't know. There are probably days there were 250, 300 people here.
Yeah.
Because we did, new mechanical and a lot of electrical upgrading and et cetera.
How was it? What was it like to work on a project like that where there's so many people?
It comes down to great pre-planning, communication, working as a team, sitting down a couple of times a week with the leaders of every subcontractor, and just discussing the plan and where we were on schedule, and what was coming up the next few weeks. And it's like any big project. It's great communication with a great plan and executing.
Do you remember any of the other subcontractors?
Jacobs Heating was here. I don't remember a lot of them. I think Fred Sheeran's son was here doing the plaster work. I don't really remember.
Yeah. And do you remember, were there other contracting companies, or just PNC, was it?
PNC was the general contractor.
Got it.
Yes. And then, all the subcontractors are hired by them.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about how the experience here at Fort Vancouver impacted you as a contractor, as a worker.
Well, I'm really proud of it. It excited me the day I showed up, and it still does today. And it's something you can relate back to. It's when you're interviewing for a historic renovation job, not very many people can point to this and say played a big role in it. And we've worked with the city and looked at some of the barracks and some of the other projects around here, and I'm sure someday we'll end up back here doing another project.
Yeah.
It was great for the resume.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How do you see the future of the work that you did here in terms of its lasting power? Is there maintenance? Do you know if there's maintenance done?
Looking at the buildings, somebody's maintaining them, but it's the bones are really good here, and it's more of a maintenance program from this point forward, and the buildings can last another 50, 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Keep them painted, keep the caulking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in terms of you starting your own contracting company,
Mm-hmm.
how did that come to be? And did your experience at Officers Row have anything to do with that?
Well, not everything had something to do with it, right? I mean, it's experience. Myself and my partner worked together at PNC, and I think we both wanted to go have our own company. And where it did help out, or in 2000, Bremik Construction was formed in June 1st of 2004. In 2006, as a very young company, because of our relationships and our experience, it opened the door for us to work with Art DeMiro and coming out of the gate in 2006, we ended up doing the White Stag blocks, which was a huge opportunity, huge risk, but another significant historic renovation. At the time, it was the largest historic renovation LEED Gold project in the United States, which was pretty cool. And we were able to, Art had the trust in us, and it's places like Officers Row that helped us cut our teeth in the historic renovation arena, and Art knew that, and we ended up pulling that off, and it's a great building.
And tell me about working on White Stag.
It was a big animal. I mean, full, seismic upgrade, major structural elements to that building, from huge brace frames and huge foundations to poured in place and shotcrete walls from the basement all the way up through the roof. The Bickle building, which is part of the White Stag block, had a major fire in it at one time. We had to go in and survey all the joist and trusses and actually measure them to see how deep they had burned. And KPFF was an engineering company and determined whether we had to replace them or if they were okay structurally. And it had a lot of challenges, a lot of different elevations between the three buildings. It was the White Stag, the Skidmore, and the Bickle building. And the Bickle building was timber and cast iron. White Stag was brick and concrete. And it was three different building types, so to speak, and different elevations, new elevators, new stairways, new everything, complete new mechanical, electrical, plumbing. It was a big job.
What's it like to work with cast iron buildings?
It's pretty cool. We also recently at Bremik, we work a lot with John Russell. I don't know if you know John. He's from Portland. He's fabulous. He's got a lot of historic buildings. He does it because it's the right thing to do, and that's who John is. And we ended up rebuilding the cast iron front on the first cast iron building in Portland. That it was a company out of San Francisco, and they came up and built that building as a showroom, and that's how cast iron got introduced to Portland. And out in Silverton, there was a foundry. We went out there, and they actually cast new columns and everything to match the existing profiles and cast iron elements of that project. So that's the first time I ever got to see that, and that was really cool. In fact, John did a documentary on that building and that process.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What is that building? Do you remember its name?
Yes. It'll come to me in a minute. I get Bickle stuck in my head.
You just interrupt whenever and give me the name, because I don't remember what it is either.
Yeah, I can't believe I don't know, because I've spent a lot of hours there.
And
don't tell John that.
when you get these projects, what's the kind of source material? Do you get to look at original plans? Does it just kind of depend on what is available?
It really depends on what's available. I mean, we've done a lot of work up at Timberline Lodge, and I've actually got to see and got to make a copy of the original hand-drawn plans from when Timberline Lodge was constructed, which is pretty cool. And the plans were, I mean, you could build to this day off that set of plans. It was really done well. In most cases, you don't have that documentation. With that being, the federal government owning it, they've done a pretty good job archiving that kind of stuff. But typically, you don't have that. You're kind of starting with a clean canvas and figuring things out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the WPA was very detailed.
Yes.
In every construction project they did.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and for Fort Vancouver or for Officers Row, did you have plans? Did you have drawings?
No, I don't think there was anything.
It was kind of a forensic process of
Yes.
restoration.
Yeah.
And how does that, is that challenging or is it fun?
I mean, I find it interesting. Again,
Yeah.
you got to think outside the box a little bit and figure things out, solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
And typically between the buildings here, most of them had a lot of similarities. From the siding, for example, most of them are the same siding, and same with the porches and the balusters and rails and trim, and then the structural elements were usually similar.
Yeah, so we mentioned cedar before. Was the siding cedar?
Yes.
Was the lath cedar?
I don't think that probably was.
Yeah.
That was probably fir, but
Yeah. How about the support beams? Or I guess the
no,
balloon?
that was Doug fir.
That was fir.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Old growth, probably.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Really old.
Yeah.
My gosh. And you had to replace some of that.
Mm-hmm.
How did you source the lumber for the frames?
Some of it was new lumber, and then some of it was reused from other buildings here, because those were rough sawn. 2x4 today is an inch and a half by 3.5. Back in those days, it was full 2x4 and rough sawn. So we were able to, we were taking walls out, for example. If it was good material, we'd pull the nails and they'd get reused.
And so cedar, Doug fir. What was the roofing material? Original roofing material?
I don't know, but I think it was a comp roof.
Yeah.
I mean, originally it wouldn't have been. It would have, at some point they came in and re-roofed. I'm sure it was a cedar shake in the beginning.
Yeah.
They didn't have comp roofing back in the 1800s.
No. Were there any other kind of material replacements that you can remember?
I mean, it was, every house had a unique need, and I'm sure there was, and nothing jumps right out at me.
Mm-hmm. And going back to your experience after working on Officers Row, and since starting your construction company, what are some other big projects that you've worked on? You mentioned Timberline, you mentioned White Stag, two of the most iconic.
Yeah, we did rebuilt the Ladd Carriage House, which was really cool. And that got moved off site for Ladd Towers and then moved back on site, and we renovated that building. Town Storage was another big historic remodel that we did. We've done some of the bigger homes up in Northwest Portland. We did a lot of work on the Manor House at Lewis and Clark College. We do a lot of work up at the college, and it was kind of hard in the very beginning of Bremik Construction. We were kind of known as the historic rehab contractor, but we were really good at other things too, and so we had that battle for a while to get our name out there. We built market apartments and K through 12 schools, etc. But it took a while, because you kind of get pigeonholed, and that doesn't work always so well.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the carriage house being moved.
Yes.
Did any of the houses here, I know they were probably raised.
Yeah, we leveled a lot of them.
Yeah.
Nothing got moved to my knowledge.
What was moving the carriage house like? Were you involved in that process?
Not really. I mean, they had a moving company. I mean, it was quite a process. And then when it was off the lot, we went over and, for example, stripped the lead paint off it and did some prep work over there, and then built the new foundation was built and brought it back over and set it down, and then finished the project.
Mm-hmm. How do you see place, if it's the carriage house, if it's Officers Row, fitting into community? How do you think that Officers Row fits into the Vancouver community, the greater Portland community? How do you think people interact with this space?
I think the people that know what's here and understand it, I think it's a huge benefit for the community. Again, it's never felt like the word's out, what's really here and how neat it is. I mean, it would be, you go across the river, there's probably a lot of people in Portland that have never heard of Officers Row. Maybe they've heard of Fort Vancouver, but they probably really don't know what it is. And if they want it exposed and, expose it to a bigger group of folks, it would have to be promoted, I would think, and it deserves it.
Do you come back
I do.
and visit?
Yeah.
How often?
Oh, once a year, once every couple of years.
Just
I
walk
mean, we
the
do,
grounds?
well, because we do projects, we do a fair number of projects over here, and so I'll drive by and, you forget really what you did and how special it is. And so it's good to come back and have a reminder.
Yeah,
I mean, I haven't been in the Marshall House in a long time.
and it stood the test of time.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. I have one last question for you.
Hmm.
What was your favorite memory working on Officers Row?
Well, again, my favorite, hands down, was finding that Oregon Territory map. That was awesome. That was so interesting. It was hand-drawn. The guys were out here. They were literally surveying for the Oregon Territory. And then it's the whole relationship with Chief Joseph and the Nez Pearson Officers Row and Howard and Grant and the group. If you understand that, it's pretty touching, and it's pretty amazing what took place in Vancouver, Washington, way back in that day. I mean, Vancouver and Portland, I learned this from John Russell in the late 1800s. It was the newfound land, the West. He said there was more money in downtown Portland, all those old historic buildings that were being built, and NATO Parkway used to have buildings lined on each side. He said there was more money in Portland than any other concentration of a city in the country, because all the East Coast money actually came out here for the opportunity, which I didn't know, but that's fascinating, and to see what they did back in that day and age. Vancouver and Portland have a pretty amazing history.
Yeah, and I lied because I thought of one more question. Were the bricks hidden bricks at all? Were there hidden, do you remember?
What do you mean by hidden brick?
Hidden brick company, Vancouver-based.
Oh, yeah.
Started in the
I don't
1970s.
remember.
That
I don't
was-
remember, because I've seen a lot of, in my travels, a lot of hidden brick.
Mhm. Are there any questions that you wish I had asked you before we wrap up?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay.
You had to pick my memory a little bit, but
Thank you.
thank you.